But this week, Telstra, it is still a reasonably highly priced company. The good thing about Telstra is it's throwing off so much operating cash flow that we can score it on a prop CAF basis. So I'll do a pulled pork on Telstra.
Wow, we haven't done one of those, I think, since the beginning of QAV. It was one we did in like 2000 and whenever it was, 19.
Did we? I didn't think I'd done Telstra.
Well, we weren't doing pulled porks back then, but back then when we started, we were taking a stock each week and breaking it down and looking at its numbers. And TLS was one of the first stocks that we ever really analysed when I was building my checklist based on trying to understand the gibberish that you were talking about. So. That's right. Like episode 3 or 4, I think, of the first season we did TLS. Yeah.
I think we were using Telstra as an example of how to find stock doctor data manually, wasn't it?
I think that was part of it, yeah. Looking at Yahoo Finance and doing all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so Telstra's back on the buy list. It's at the very bottom of the buy list, so it may not be there for long. So do your own research. And look, I've got to say, Telstra is one of those companies I'm very ambivalent towards. And I don't mean indifferent. I mean the dictionary definition of ambivalence. I love it and I hate it. And doing this pulled pork just brought out all those emotions in me again, because Telstra is really two businesses, and a couple of years ago they actually separated them into separate companies under a holding company, Telstra Group, and the market got excited because they thought they were going to spin off the infrastructure business, Telstra Infrastructure. And that's the part I love. I mean, we're sitting here talking on Zoom, and we'll put out a podcast on people's phones that they can listen to, and it's all done over the backbone of all the telco infrastructure in Australia that, it's been around for a long time. And Telstra pretty much owns and manages most of that, if not almost all of it. I mean, Vodafone and Optus will have a bit, but nowhere near as much as Telstra has.
Isn't it NBN? Isn't it Kevin Rudd's home network?
Yeah, well, NBN's in there now too. I think, didn't it get sold back to Telstra a year or two ago, I think?
I don't know. I haven't followed it.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. But NBN aside, the rest, like the undersea cables, some satellites, all the data centers, the switches, all that kind of stuff, it's all Telstra. And that's the side I love. I mean, that just gets on with doing it. There's very rarely an outage. Occasionally there's an outage. But we rely on it all the time. To me, that's a good business. Then you got the other side, which is like the retail arm, which whenever I engage in them, they are just the worst retailers ever. I think I spoke years ago about when I came back to Australia and tried to set up my home phone at Cape Schanck, and just spent days in call center waiting queues to try and sort out the most basic of situations. And I don't even know or try to guess what's the best mobile service plan for me to be on. It's just all too complicated. So that's the side of Telstra I hate. And interestingly enough, and going through some of their more recent announcements, they want to make the customer experience part of their growth plans. And I that wouldn't be hard to do because they're coming off a very low base, but they've got to do a lot better than go to a Telstra store. Last time I went to a Telstra store, there was no one in it. And I got told to take a number and come back in half an hour when it would be my turn. I'm like, there's no one here.
Walk straight into the Optus shop. Yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah, well, we actually have TPG here now because I got so pissed off with trying to get onto Telstra. So anyway, that's the side I hate. I mean, Telstra has a great storied history. It's basically a government business that was floated under John Howard in 2 tranches. But before that, it goes right back to the early 1900s, 1901, I think, when the telegraph lines and the telegrams were all put under the auspices of the Postmaster General. So for a long time, Telstra was called PMG. And then around about the time of World War II, Australia started to realise it needed to have reliable communications with the rest of the world, and dropped a few undersea cables, and that became, I think, OTC, Overseas Telecommunications Company. And then a bit after that, they were combined, became Telecom, and then floated and became Telstra, and then just recently had this kind of internal demerger, and it's now Telstra Group. So it's been around for a long time, long history. Like I said, one side, the infrastructure side, is a good business, and it's growing too, because the use of data just keeps on growing as things become more and more digitized. I did have a laugh when they were talking about increasing their satellite business, and I thought about the fact that I couldn't get that at Cape Schanck, which was the only place I needed it. So I got Elon Musk's satellite instead. So they've still got a long way to go with their customer service. What else can I say about them? Australia's largest telco, obviously. Latest Investor Day update called out customer experience, 5G, and satellite as their growth areas. And I just put a question mark against those three things, because I don't think they do any of those things well. So, I shouldn't say they don't do 5G well. It's a growing part of their business. But I remember all the hype around 5G when it came out, and I think we had it in Canada slightly ahead of Australia, and I had a SIM card that could convert from 3 or 4G to 5G, and I'm like, there's no difference, and I still can't name any benefit from 5G, that we get compared to what we used to have. Really, it's either all happened seamlessly, or it's all been a lot of hype. But yeah, so not sure about 5G.
Your download
Infraco,
speeds on 5G are massively higher than 4G if you've got a good signal. Like, I get 200 megabits a second download on 5G, which I never would have got on 4G, but don't know if you ever try and download or upload anything that big from your phone to care about it.
no,
It's not like you're
no.
not streaming video on your phone. I mean,
No.
things like if you're taking a FaceTime call or something like that when you're on a
Mhm.
walk and you're away from your Wi-Fi in the house, that's where 5G comes into play, really. But if you're not doing that, if you're just reading the ABC or the Fin Review on your phone, yeah, you don't really need the 5G. It's
I don't
probably
read them on my
overkill.
phone. I read them on my laptop.
Yeah. So if you're not
Yeah.
using your phone for high
Yeah.
bandwidth applications, but I think for people with jobs who are out and about, doing stuff on their iPads and their
Okay.
iPhones and running corporate apps, CRM apps, ERP apps, Salesforce, all that kind of stuff, a lot of data probably is a good thing.
Okay.
I'm just here,
Well,
like, I hate Telstra with a passion, and I'll tell you why at the end of this. But I get it. 5G is good. I'm not gonna let you shit talk 5G on my watch.
well, I'm not shit talking it. I just thought it was tremendous hype that I haven't seen much benefit from, but I defer to your experience. Okay.
That'll be
So
that'll be the only time that ever happens.
yeah. What else can I say? So some of the things which I found interesting, which were also in their Investor Day briefing, they are calling out growth areas being data centers, which makes sense. Growth in fiber, which might be NBN related, I'm not sure, and security. So I think they probably are legitimate growth centers for them. Probably going back to your 5G comments, the mobile business is seeing 30% growth in data usage. So that's year on year, which is quite tremendous for them. Anyway, I think there's no point going into Telstra in any more detail. Most people have used them or not used them or loved them or been pissed off by them over the years. And it's, the funny thing is, it's not just Telstra. When I was in Canada, Rogers was the big telco player, and everyone just loved to hate Rogers. I had a friend whose husband got a job working for Rogers, and she just said, before you say anything, it's just a job. Yeah, she just had to keep defending herself. Anyway, look at the numbers, and this is where it gets interesting, because it's a very large company. I think it would be a difficult company to run. It's quite possible that splitting it and floating off infrastructure, Telstra, Infraco, would be a good thing. I think those But Telstra never came out and said they were doing that, and they're certainly not saying it now, but it might happen in the future, and things are being set up so it can happen. But just the span of everything they do must be, hell on earth for a CEO to try and manage all the fires and the risks and all those different areas. And maybe a bit of focus would come if it was split up. But anyway, we don't have to worry about ADT because it's nearly $71 million a day. So it's a very highly traded stock on the ASX. I'm doing the analysis of the share price of $4, which is less than consensus target. The yield, Telstra for a long time has been considered to be, as I said once before, a bond proxy. So, something that has bond-like characteristics. It's a very stable share price. It's probably traded in the $3 to $4 type range for the last 5 years, and it pays a decent yield. But I think these days with interest rates high, the yield isn't enough. So the yield at the moment is 4.25%, but it needs to have a yield of 6.8% to score on our checklist. And I guess it begs the question, if this is a kind of bond, then if you can get those kinds of rates from putting your money in the bank, why do you take any sort of risk on and dealing with Telstra stuffing things up and the share price going down? So I think that may lead to them raising their interest rate or their dividend, yield at some stage. We'll wait and see on that one. Stock Doctor actually rate them as a star income stock, which we give 0.5 point for in our checklist. But I think, if I was a retiree and I can get the same sort of yield with less risk, I don't think I'd be buying Telstra. I'd probably just buy an index fund, which has a similar sort of yield anyway. Stock Doctor Financial Health is strong and steady, so that's all good. Prop cap for this is just under our cutoff of 7. It's 6.79 times. ROE is okay, even though we don't use it to score with. I'll just call it out for listeners. It's 11.3%, which is on the low side, I guess, but it is a big company with lots of assets. Net equity per share is $1.54. So share price at $4. We can't buy this for anything like the book value. Earnings per share growth is 10%, which again isn't bad for a company the size of Telstra, but it's not enough to score for our earnings per share over PE score. Obviously no owner founder. It's been around for too long, and the current board doesn't have any large shareholders that we can score. PE is still pretty high. It's 23.95, but it is the lowest in the last 6 halves, so we do score it for that. So it is still a reasonably highly priced company. The good thing about Telstra is it's throwing off so much operating cash flow that we can score it on a prop cap basis. It's a reasonably recent 3-point trend line upturn, so we score it for that. Just misses scoring for consistently increasing equity. There was one half when it dropped backwards slightly, so we can't give it a score for that. But all in all, quality score of 10.5 out of 16 or 66%, and a QAV score of 0.1. So anybody who wants a large cap blue chip type of stock, this might be the time to buy it. So, but have a look and do your own research.
Thank you, Tony. I've told you these stories before, but when I was in my Microsoft days, I had a lot to do with Telstra. And this is like Frank Blunt was the CEO, and then Sol Trujillo, and then Ziggy Swikowski, and it was just like horrible. Just the corporate attitude of the company then. I remember taking all of the senior execs, like the general manager, I think they called them GMs of all the divisions, out to dinner in New Orleans. Flew them all over to the US to meet with Bill Gates and all the execs, Frank Blunt and all of the guys. Took all the guys out for dinner one night. And this is like 1998. And they'd been rolling cable out around the country. Bill Gates had made a big deal, that they'd been rolling cable out a couple of years earlier, did the joint venture with them. but they weren't making it available. We had all of this cable in the ground, but they wouldn't make it. I mean, you could get it, but it was like for $1,000 a month if you wanted high bandwidth internet access. And I said to them, why, or when are you going to make this stuff available, the high bandwidth access to people? And they said, when we're forced to. I said, what do you mean? They go, well, when we're forced to by the government, then we'll do it. And I was like, well, why did you spend billions of dollars rolling out cable if you weren't going to make it available? And they said, it's easy, it's to stop Optus. So if Optus laid cable in the ground, Telstra laid cable in the ground, it was just to stop Optus from getting a foothold. I said, so you're spending billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, because they hadn't been completely, I think they were like 30% or 60% floated at the time. You're spending taxpayers' money to stop Australians from getting access to high bandwidth internet access. And they were like, yep. Because they were defending their moat, basically.
Instead of working out ways they could sell it for and what margin and what services they could offer.
And if you were a privately owned company, fine, do whatever you want with your money. But when they were still partly taxpayer owned, to spend taxpayer money to stop taxpayers from getting access to internet just drove me nuts. And it's their whole attitude. It was just like their level of arrogance out of all of the senior execs in these companies about how domineering they were. And they were terrified. You know, the longer I spent in there, I realized they had no idea what would happen to telephony revenues. And they were right to be terrified as well. Once people had access to VoIP, voice over IP, which is what we were all talking about back then. Now we just call it FaceTime or Skype, but it was voice over IP. What that would happen to their revenue stream, which was telephone calls primarily. They knew it was going to white ant their own revenue, and they were determined to stop that from happening as long as possible, even though doing that meant stop Australians from getting access to, you know, bandwidth. And which is one of the reasons why Microsoft dumped Telstra as a partner and went with Packer for online services, was because Telstra were just dragging their feet. They were determined not to give Australians access to fast internet and fast internet enabled services until they absolutely had to. We could have been Australia. One of the reasons Gates was excited in 95 and did the joint venture was Australia could have been the world leader in providing high internet access and services on top of that in the late 90s. But Telstra stopped us from being able to do that because they didn't know what it meant to their voice revenues and also their Foxtel revenues, right? They had the Foxtel JV around about that time, didn't know what it meant for that. So them and Murdoch just, and you know, prevented it, made the NBN rollout really hard as well. All the politics involved in the early days of the NBN rollout and all of the FUD that was going on about, well, satellites versus cable. And, you know, remember Turnbull, you know, and I'll never forgive Turnbull for this, saying, oh, cable, putting glass under the ground, that's going to be outdated in 6 months. There'll all be satellites. It'll all be like, you know, wireless bullshit. And everyone in the industry knew it was bullshit, but just stopped us again. The second time around, we could have had, you know, NBN 10 years faster than we had it and all of the services that come from that. Just, anywho, that's my rant over. Moving right along.
So you're not going to be putting Telstra into the dummy portfolio?
I will buy it if I have to buy it. Yeah, them and Atlas, bloody, what is it?
Apollo Tourism.
You know, if they're in the portfolio, I'll buy them. I hate them.
Yeah.
I'll do it with gritted teeth, but I'll do it.